Here I have a Mantua Santa Fe F unit, and this model does not really run, and today I'm going to try and fix that. So I have the unit set up on my little test track. I'll apply some power with my controller right here, and we'll see what happens. I've now got full power in the track. So far, absolutely nothing is happening. I'll give it a little bit of help. And the headlight comes on, and it moves just a little bit, but it is extremely sluggish for this being full power. So clearly I have a little bit of work to do. Before that though, let me give you a tour of this Mantua F7. Just in case any of you were wondering, this F7 came from a lot of locomotives off of eBay. I probably paid about $5 or $10 for this model, which really is not a lot for one of these old Mantua units. So I'll show you around this unit, starting with the shell, which is actually in really good shape. There's not really much dust or anything of that nature on this model. I found a lot of really dusty and really filthy models recently, so it's a nice change for once. All the paint seems to be intact. There is some overspray, which is typical of these old Mantua units. Coming around to the front, the decal is fully intact, which can sometimes be an issue. The horns are securely mounted in place. I've had a lot of models missing horns lately, so that's kind of nice. Up front, we do have two small little defects. We've got a paint chip here, and we've got a pretty big chip here, which if I bring the model up closer, you might be able to see is actually a little bit of a divot. We do have this one little broken ladder right here, but other than that, the shell is in very nice condition. Flipping the model over, once again, everything seems to look really nice. We are missing the coupler up front. I may install a new horn hook at some point, but I'm probably not going to since we have a Katy on this end of the model. It would be very difficult for me to get a matching Katy up front and have it function properly, which if I was going to put a Katy in, why wouldn't I want it to function properly? So I'm just going to leave it blank. The wheels actually look pretty nice. I'm going to talk about those later in the video though, so stay tuned for that. And it looks like someone has actually drilled out the rivets of the rear power truck right here and has installed their own screws. I have a model I actually need to do this to in the near future, so I'm going to definitely take some notes when we're taking this unit apart. Something else I found common with these Mantua units is the traction tires. Despite the age of the models, the rubber on these tires seems to hold up very well, and this model is no exception. These still feel like they will provide plenty of traction, and there's really no reason to replace them. So I'm going to leave the original traction tires on here because they seem to be doing their job just fine. And just because I'm curious, I'm going to check the height of the coupler on the rear of this model. I'm going to assume it's not perfect. A lot of the coupler additions on these old models really never are, but we'll see if it's good enough to work with some of my rolling stock. And as you can see, it's a little bit high. I might have a coupler with a different shank height that I can install, and that might make a difference, but we'll see if we get to that. And just by putting it on here, I can definitely tell those traction tires still feel very strong. Now that the walk around and test run of this model is complete, it's time to actually start tearing into it. And I'm going to begin with the power truck itself right here. To get this truck out, we just have two clips on either side, so I just need to unclip those and then pull the entire assembly out of the model. So it's disassembled as much as possible now, and everything looks to be in pretty nice shape. As is typical for a lot of these older units, there's a lot of dried on oil, lubricant, and a little bit of hair stuck in all these pieces. That's nothing too bad to deal with, and I've dealt with many models much worse than this, so that should be a pretty simple walk in the park. The commutator itself looks to be in pretty good shape. The motor does not seem to have any burned coils or anything, and overall everything is in pretty good condition. I suspect all this model really needs is a tune-up, and it should be good to go. Earlier I mentioned I have another Mantua unit to work on in the near future, which I need to tear down just like this. However, that's one of the models that is riveted in place and does not use screws, unlike this one, which has actually been modified to use screws to hold the bottom plate together. I have an example of a Mantua truck that is riveted together right here. We got the rivet starting up here, and then down here we have a little bit of a mushroom shape. So on that unit, what I need to do is I need to drill out those mushrooms, remove the rivets, and just like this unit, install some aftermarket screws to make everything work. So before we dive into repairing this model, I wanted to take a look at the work that had been done to install screws to this specific Mantua unit and see what I can take and use or change when I'm working on my own unit. To start, and it's an aspect of that repair that I completely forgot about, I need to have two screws on the top of the motor in addition to the ones on the bottom, because these two serve a very important role. They hold this plate onto the motor. And what's important about this plate is it's the piece that clips into the shell, which you just saw me remove, that holds the entire motor truck in place. Without these screws up here, this piece would just be flopping around and the motor would not be firmly attached to the locomotive, and that would for sure be an issue. Flipping this truck over, I do want to talk about the one thing that was done that I really don't like. I don't like how they just tapped directly into the casing itself instead of adding some sleeve and then a smaller size screw. They just tapped directly into the metal here and installed this very large screw, which I don't like for a plethora of reasons. For one, these screws look way too bulky for this model. The screw head is way too wide, and the screw head itself is also way too tall. It just doesn't look good if you flip the model over, and it bugs me. The other thing I fear is that if you're tapping straight into here, it looks like there is a little bit of a weak point on the inside of each post. I fear that if you're tapping into that and trying to expand the size, it can cause a fracture, and that is for sure no good. So what I intend on doing is I have some brass tubing laying around, which I can tap some smaller screws into, and I think I will use that when I work on my own model in the future. So now that we have all of these components apart, and have done my investigative work taking a look at how this truck was modified to accept screws, it's time to clean up all these pieces, and to do that, I'm just going to be using some rubbing alcohol and some Q-tips. All these parts have been cleaned up. I did forget to mention that I used a fiberglass pencil to clean off the commutator, as I typically do, but now it's time to give all these parts some fresh oil and some fresh grease in the form of Labelle 107 and Labelle 106, and then get everything put back together. Surely for fun, I'm going to test this motor out before we put everything back together. I've got about 60% power in my test controller, and we'll just see with these two leads if it'll start. Again, this is on low power, but that actually seems to be running pretty well and pretty consistently. So now we can put this power truck back into the shell of the model, and we can focus a little bit of attention to this front truck. Before I clean up the wheels on this front truck, I do want to talk about how exactly I clean wheels. Typically, I just use rubbing alcohol, but I did a little bit of experimenting. Recently, I got this cheap Dremel, and I've tested it out on my spare Mantua motor truck, which I actually showed off earlier. And here are the results, and I'm not the happiest with them. I'll show you the bits that I have available in a little while, but as you can see, it's really not all that smooth. It did clean up the wheels, but there is a little bit of pitting, and I really don't like the effect and how it looks. Plus, it does leave some brass residue around the truck itself, and I'm not a big fan of that. Here's all the accessories that came with the little rotary tool, and I actually tried using two of these to clean up the wheels of that one power truck. First off, I used this one polishing wheel. I wasn't the happiest with the results of that, so I went on to this one that's a little bit more of a solid grinding wheel, and again, I wasn't really happy with the results. It could be that I'm using this wrong, or it might just be that since this is a cheap Amazon tool, this isn't really what it was meant to do. It's more of a cutting, sanding sort of tool, and I really don't think its sole purpose is to polish and clean wheels like these. But if anyone does have any advice, let me know. If there is one of these bits you think I should be using just as an experimental piece, let me know because I would really like to find a better way to clean wheels than just using rubbing alcohol, because especially on brass wheels like these, it's not always the most effective tool. So now it's time to really quickly clean these two wheels up with some rubbing alcohol, and then use a little bit more Labelle 107 just to give these bearings a little bit of fresh oil. With that, we've gone through everything on this locomotive, so now it's time to take it back over to my test track and see what happens. So, the engine's now set up, I'll give the thing some power and we'll see what happens. And it starts right up. Now I'll put the thing in reverse. And that seems to be a great result. So after all that work, we got a great running engine, and I think this will be a unit that should last for a very long time.